Welcome to another Scars Institute audiobook. This is Emily's story, in two parts. The first part is Emily's story. This is the story of a romance scam victim and her experience. This story is being shared so that other victims may both understand that they are not alone, but also understand that getting help can save their life. You will understand why as the story unfolds. This is a fictionalization of a real story. The names have been changed to protect those involved. The second part is an analysis of what happened and why. Please note that aspects of this story are hard to hear. This may trigger you if you have experienced something similar. If you feel triggered or overwhelmed, we recommend that you pause this and come back later. The purpose of this story is to educate you about the importance of getting real help and understanding the dangers that can come with these crimes. And now the Scars Institute presents Emily's Story, written by Dr. Tim McGuinness, Managing Director and co-founder of the Scars Institute, who has been working to educate and support scam victims for 34 years. We hope this story is meaningful in your own exploration of what may have happened to you.
Here is Emily's story. Chapter 1. Emily Jacobs was not looking for love. At 53, she had built a quiet life in the rural outskirts of Madison, Wisconsin. She taught English at the local community college, lived in a modest craftsman-style home filled with books, and spent weekends tending her small vegetable garden. Her days were simple, predictable. She liked them that way. Her friends occasionally teased her for being too content. They tried coaxing her into dating apps or Sunday brunch mixers at the Unitarian Church, but Emily always declined politely. Her last serious relationship had ended 15 years ago, leaving her with a lingering sense of caution. Since then, she had grown used to her own company. Comfortable, if not exactly happy. Then came the message. It arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon in February, through the messaging feature of a crossword app she had downloaded out of boredom. His name was Michael. He said he had noticed her username, Wit and Tea, and thought it was clever. They started chatting about word games, favorite books, and the bitter Wisconsin winter. Michael claimed to be a civil engineer working in Dubai. Originally from North Carolina, he said, but he had lived all over. His wife had passed away years ago. He had one daughter in college, studying to be a nurse. The stories came gently, never forced. He wasn't pushy or overly romantic. He asked Emily about her teaching, her garden, her dreams. He listened. She didn't remember when it shifted, when the conversations went from casual to comforting, when she started looking forward to his messages more than the sound of her own thoughts. He made her laugh. He sent her poems. On her birthday in March, he sent an audio recording of himself singing Unchained Melody. No one had ever done that for her. Emily began to check her phone every morning, heart fluttering when his name appeared. She told herself it was just a friendship. Then she caught herself smiling at the mirror. She bought a new blouse in spring colors, imagining what it might be like to wear it for him. Michael told her he was finishing a major project in Dubai and hoped to visit the States in May. He even mentioned coming to Madison. They would meet, he said. Finally, she began fantasizing about showing him the Arboretum, the best coffee shop downtown, her favorite spot by Lake Mendota. Then the trouble began. He was upset one morning. Something had gone wrong with the customs clearance for his equipment, he said. His contract was at risk. Everything he had worked for might fall apart. Emily listened, concerned. He said he had a temporary cash flow problem. His overseas bank account was frozen, and he needed to wire some funds to release his cargo. It was just a small loan, he assured her. He would pay her back the moment he was back in the U.S. He even promised to bring her something special from Dubai. Emily hesitated. The amount wasn't trivial, $2,500, a significant sum for her modest budget. But she told herself she believed in him, that this was what people did for each other, especially when love was involved. She had no intention of doubting him, not when he made her feel so alive, so seen. The thought of ending their connection never crossed her mind. She wired the money through a bank transfer. Then came another delay, another payment, a minor emergency, a new banking issue. By the time she had wired her third transfer, totaling $10,000, she had started lying to her sister about her finances. She couldn't explain why she felt so loyal to someone she'd never met in person, but the idea of losing him was unbearable. Each request came with a new promise, a new declaration of love, and Emily clung to the hope that he would keep his word. She wasn't ready to question him, not yet. Her love for him was too deep, too consuming. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the spring rain, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. The amounts were adding up, and Michael's excuses seemed to grow more frequent. But she pushed the thought away, unwilling to let suspicion taint the joy he brought her. She opened her phone and reread his latest message. "You're my everything, Emily. I can't wait to hold you in my arms." Her heart swelled with longing, and she smiled softly to herself. She wasn't ready to let go of the dream, not when it felt so real, so close. In the weeks that followed, Emily's love for Michael only deepened. She spent her evenings imagining their future together, picturing the moment they would finally meet. She wrote him long messages about her day, her hopes, her fears, pouring her heart into every word. She didn't see the red flags, didn't want to see them. She was moving forward, fully in love with the man she believed Michael to be, unaware of the storm that was slowly building on the horizon. Chapter 2. The beginning of the game. In a cramped but orderly two-room apartment on the outskirts of Lagos, the Obasai family shared everything: food, chores, and dreams. Electricity was unreliable, running water a luxury. But through it all, they were close-knit and honest. Chinedu, the oldest of 4 siblings, had always taken pride in his family's dignity, even in poverty. Their mother sold vegetables in the local market, and their father had passed when Chinedu was just 16. Since then, he had worked side jobs after school to help support the family. But no matter how hard they worked, the numbers never added up. The rent increased every year. Medicine for their youngest brother, Ikin, was always just out of reach. Chinedu was studying computer science at the university, trying to make something of himself, though the fees alone left his family gasping. It was during his second year that the turning point came. A classmate named Pascal, once just as broke as Chinedu, suddenly started wearing branded clothes, carrying the latest phone, and paying his fees in cash. Chinedu asked him what had changed. Pascal didn't give details at first. He just smiled and said, "I found a way. A real one. Not Yahoo like the fools in the market. This is clean, controlled, smart." But Chinedu pressed. He had too much riding on his shoulders to ignore the possibility. Eventually, Pascal invited him to a small, private gathering at a cafe outside campus. There, for young men in their 20s explained what they did. Romance work, they called it. Digital seduction. They used fake identities, studied American culture, and targeted lonely hearts. It wasn't about theft, they said. It was emotional negotiation, convincing people to give out of love. They want to believe, one of them said. We just give them the story they're already waiting to hear. Chinedu was uneasy. His stomach twisted at the idea. But the numbers Pascal showed him were real. Screenshots of transfers. Testimonies from clients. And then there was the pitch. He wouldn't be alone. He could build a team, train his younger siblings, divide the roles. One would handle photos and accounts. Another would write the scripts. A third would manage the time zones. It sounded like a business. A dark, dishonest one, but a business nonetheless. He said no. For 2 weeks. Then Ikin's health declined. The medication cost more than they had in the house. Their mother cried quietly in the bedroom. Chinedu found Pascal's number again. Within a month, they were a team. Not hardened criminals, but desperate. Chinedu created a fake profile of a man named Michael, a civil engineer working in Dubai. His sister, Amaka, scoured social media for photos. His cousin handled the messaging apps. Together, they crafted the illusion of a man who existed only in pixels and fantasy. And then, one day, a woman named Emily responded to their message. Chinedu hesitated before writing back. It had begun. Chapter 3. The Grooming. Emily first heard from him on a rainy Thursday evening in February. She had been sorting through her lesson plans for the next week's classes at the community college, her mind wandering between the monotony of grading papers and the stubborn ache of loneliness. When her phone buzzed with a message request, she assumed it was another spammer. But the name on the account was Michael, and the message was polite, respectful. "Good evening, ma'am. I hope I'm not intruding. I saw your username in the crossword app and thought it seemed interesting. If you don't mind a little friendly conversation, I'd be glad to chat," he wrote. Something about his tone was different. Not pushy, not flirtatious. It felt gentle, cautious. Emily hesitated, then responded. "Sure. I'm not very exciting, but feel free to chat." That was how it began. At first, the conversations were light. Michael said he was a civil engineer working in Dubai, originally from North Carolina, with a daughter in college studying to be a nurse. He spoke of long workdays, the heat of the desert, and missing the simple pleasures of home, like the sound of rain on a roof. He asked about Madison, about Emily's work as an English teacher, and he even joked about needing her help to improve his vocabulary for crosswords. Within a week, they were messaging daily. Michael never rushed. He never pushed Emily into personal topics. Instead, he listened. When Emily mentioned her love for gardening, he asked follow-up questions the next day. When she spoke about missing her late parents, he sent a quote about the enduring strength of family bonds. He made her feel seen. Weeks passed, and slowly, the tone began to shift. Michael started to open up more about his past. He said he'd lost his wife years ago to cancer, a story he shared with quiet grief, but also resilience. He wasn't bitter, he said, just lonely. Like Emily. The first time he called her beautiful, it wasn't attached to a photo. It followed a long message she had written about a poetry reading she organized at the college. "You have a beautiful heart, Emily. That kind of passion is rare," he wrote. It hit her unexpectedly. No man had said anything like that in years. Maybe ever. And then came the voice messages. They were short, clips of Michael speaking in a warm, slightly accented voice, often mentioning the desert heat or a long day at work. He smiled easily, but there was always a touch of weariness in his tone. He told her she made the hard days easier, that he looked forward to her messages more than anything. Emily, who had never looked for love, now waited anxiously for her phone to buzz each morning. What she didn't know was that her words, her stories, and even the way she expressed grief were being carefully studied. Thousands of miles away in Lagos, in a small concrete apartment, Chinedu and his team sat around a cracked laptop, crafting replies together. They were careful with grammar. They reviewed voice notes twice before sending. They debated word choices, trying to match the tone Emily responded to best. Her social media posts were monitored. Her favorite phrases were repeated back to her. The grooming was deliberate. It was slow, and it was working. By week 6, Michael began to refer to her as his light, his angel. "You remind me that there's something good waiting for me beyond this project," he wrote. Emily didn't think of herself as naive, but she started to believe in something again, not just in Michael, but in the idea that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. She didn't know it yet, but she was already emotionally invested, and that was exactly what they needed. Chapter 4. The Escalation. The messages from Michael began to evolve. At first, they were sweet, thoughtful, and light. He asked about your day, your dreams, your favorite books and music. He sent photos of himself in what looked like a construction site, sometimes in front of heavy machinery, sometimes in a hard hat with a desert backdrop. You couldn't help but be drawn to his warmth. It wasn't the photos that convinced you. It was the way he listened. He remembered small things. When you mentioned your love for black coffee with cinnamon, he brought it up days later, saying he'd tried it because of you. When you talked about your late father's old jazz records, Michael responded with a YouTube link to a Coltrane solo that reminded him of your story. These weren't things a scammer would say, you thought. This was different. Back in Lagos, Chinedu's team had already created a background dossier. They knew your city, your work history from LinkedIn, the public posts on your Facebook, the obituary you had once shared about your father. They used this information sparingly, strategically, so that it felt like Michael was slowly getting to know you. They were careful not to move too fast. The goal was emotional dependence, not quick cash. The script was flexible, designed to adapt to each mark. Chinedu had taken over most of the messaging. His English was polished from years of consuming American media, and he had a natural gift for tone. He knew when to be charming, when to be reserved. He studied your language and mirrored it, creating a rhythm in your chats that felt effortless. Over the next few weeks, Michael shared more about his life. He claimed he was a widower with a daughter in college, living with a nanny in North Carolina while he worked overseas. He sent photos of her, stolen from an old parenting blog. You felt your heart tug at the story. A child without her mother, a man working hard abroad, alone and vulnerable. Michael spoke of coming home soon. He said he was tired of long projects, tired of pretending he was okay. He told you that you made him feel something again, something real. You found yourself rereading his messages before bed, holding your phone to your chest like a teenager. You hadn't told anyone about him. Not yet. It felt too precious, too fragile to share. The team in Nigeria celebrated small wins. When you first sent a selfie without being asked, they knew the bond was forming. When you shared a short audio clip of your laughing at one of Michael's jokes, they saved it. These were indicators like data points, feeding into the decision of when to escalate the narrative. One night, Michael said he dreamed of you. He described it in vivid detail, a walk on a quiet beach, your hand in his, your smile lit by moonlight. You cried when you read it. Not because you believed every word, but because someone finally seemed to see you. This was how grooming worked. Not through seduction, but through slow entanglement. Through listening. Through echoes of familiarity and safety. And always, always, with the promise of something just out of reach. Chapter 5. Cracks in the Illusion. By early spring, the soft bloom of new love had taken firm root in your heart. The daily messages from Michael were still tender, often filled with romantic phrases and poetic declarations that made you feel like you had stepped into a novel. Yet beneath the surface, subtle inconsistencies began to show, small, almost forgettable details that didn't quite add up. The first red flag came quietly. Michael had told you he was a civil engineer working on a large infrastructure project in Dubai. But one evening, in casual conversation, he mentioned being called to a meeting in Abu Dhabi with his supervisors. You paused. You remembered his stories vividly, Dubai, not Abu Dhabi. But when you questioned him gently, Michael replied with a quick explanation. The company was multinational, and his assignments sometimes required travel within the UAE. You accepted the explanation, though unease flickered in the back of your mind. Soon after, a second discrepancy surfaced. Michael sent you a photo of his dinner, a plate of jollof rice, fried plantains, and grilled chicken. Comfort food from home, he said. The phrase stayed with you. He had told you he was raised in North Carolina. You Googled North Carolinian cuisine that night, but the dishes didn't match. Still, you told yourself that people moved around. Maybe he had lived in West Africa for a time. Maybe it wasn't important. Then came the moment that truly unsettled you. One late night in April, Michael asked if you could help him transfer a sum of money. He claimed his bank card had expired, and he needed to pay a customs fee for a piece of equipment stuck at the airport. It was only $2,500, and he promised to pay you back as soon as his new card arrived. You hesitated. You had grown close, but money had never been part of your conversations before. He didn't pressure you, but his tone was urgent, almost embarrassed. I hate asking, he said, but you're the only one I trust. You didn't sleep that night. Something about the request felt off. Still, by morning, the fear of losing him outweighed the warning signs. You wired the money through a Zelle transfer. Michael was profusely grateful and promised it would never happen again. Over the next 2 weeks, more requests followed. Each time there was a new reason, a blocked payment, an emergency expense, a travel delay. The amounts grew, 5,000, then 10,000, then 15,000, and more. You found yourself juggling justifications in your head, making excuses for inconsistencies. Sometimes you confronted him. He always had answers. Logical ones. Emotionally charged ones. Ones that made you feel guilty for doubting him. But deep inside, something had shifted. The magic was still there, but it was no longer seamless. The fairy tale now had footnotes, and the footnotes carried questions you weren't sure how to answer. You confided in your friend Rachel one afternoon over coffee. Rachel listened without judgment, but her silence spoke volumes. Just be careful, she said softly. Love makes us see what we want to see. You nodded, smiling weakly. But your chest felt tight. A quiet alarm had started to ring inside you, low, persistent, impossible to ignore. You weren't ready to let go, but you had begun, in small ways, to start asking the questions that would eventually change everything. Chapter 6. The Escalation of Financial Requests. By late April, the requests from Michael had become more frequent, each one layered with a new story of urgency. He had already asked for $25,000 to cover a customs fee, then $5,000 for a blocked payment, and $10,000 for an emergency expense. Now, he claimed a travel delay had left him stranded, and he needed $25,000 to stabilize the project and secure a flight back to the U.S. He sent you what looked like official documents, an invoice, a bank email, a flight itinerary. It all seemed legitimate, but the growing amounts made your stomach churn. You hesitated, your savings already strained from the previous transfers. You were an English professor, not a wealthy woman, and the money you'd sent was meant for your retirement fund. But Michael's tone was desperate, almost pleading. I hate to ask again, but I'm stuck, Emily. I need to get back to you. You're my everything, he wrote. His words tugged at your heart, and the dream of finally meeting him in person, of starting a new life together, pushed you to act. You wired the $25,000 through a bank transfer, as he instructed, telling yourself it was the last time. Michael was profusely grateful, sending you voice messages filled with emotion. You're my angel, Emily. I'll make this up to you, I swear, he said. You wanted to believe him, but the unease was growing. You started losing sleep, your mind replaying each request, each promise, each moment of doubt. Back in Lagos, Chinedu and his team were celebrating. The escalation was working perfectly. They had studied your responses, noting how you reacted to emotional appeals more than logical ones. Chinedu, who had taken on the role of Michael, knew exactly how to keep you hooked, mixing gratitude with promises of a future together, always keeping the dream just out of reach. They had already extracted $120,000 from you, and they were planning the next phase, a larger request that would push you further into their web. Chapter 7. Cracks in the Dream. By early May, the cracks in the dream were becoming harder to ignore. Michael's messages, once a daily source of joy, now carried a subtle tension. He still sent his voice notes, still called you baby, and told you were the only light in his life, but now there was a new weight in his voice. He sounded tired, distracted, and there was a strain under the surface of your conversations, as if he was holding something back. It was a Wednesday evening when the next request came. He apologized for even asking, but something had gone wrong with his offshore payment system. A delay, he said, just a week or two. In the meantime, his team needed to purchase some safety equipment, and if they didn't meet compliance, he could lose his contract. He was stressed, panicked. Could you help him with a short-term loan? Just $200,000. You froze. Your stomach tightened. You didn't have that kind of extra money. Your savings were already depleted, and you lived month to month on your professor's salary. Your heart raced as you typed back that you wanted to help but couldn't. Michael didn't respond for nearly a full day. The silence was suffocating. When he finally replied, he said he understood. He just needed to try other options. His messages were colder, shorter. That night, you cried. The next morning, he sent a long apology. He said he'd been under enormous pressure. He said he was ashamed for putting you in that position. He didn't want your money. He just wanted you. His voice message ended with a shaky breath and the words, "You make me feel like a man again. Don't let this mistake come between us." You forgave him. You wanted to believe. You needed to. A week later, he tried again. This time it was for a different reason. The company accountant was asking for a personal guarantee. He needed to send a payment to unlock his funds, and he swore it would be refunded in a matter of days. This time, he only asked for $50,000. He promised to send you proof, contracts, email screenshots, even a copy of his passport. You hesitated, but you told yourself it wasn't that much. And if it helped get him home sooner. You took a loan on your credit cards and tried to wire the money the next day, but the bank refused. That night, Michael was upset, but told you he had never felt so close to someone in his life. That when all this was behind him, he wanted to take you to Paris. He sent photos of a hotel, he was eyeing for your future trip. You stared at the photos long after the conversation ended, the sun setting outside your window. But deep in your chest, the first real doubt had taken root. You didn't know it yet, but the cracks in the dream had begun to spread. Chapter 8. The FBI arrives to confront Emily about being a money mule. It was a Thursday morning in late May. The light was thin through the curtains, the kind of pale gray that made the morning feel slower than it should be. You were in the kitchen, stirring your coffee, half listening to the local news humming in the background. Your phone buzzed on the counter, another message from Michael. "Baby, I'll call you in a bit. Don't forget to check for that deposit today. It is urgent." You were tired. Not just physically, but somewhere deeper, bone deep. For weeks, the unease had been growing. Your stomach knotted every time a new deposit showed up, followed by another set of instructions. You had started sleeping with your phone on silent, something you'd never done before, just to get a few uninterrupted hours of rest. At 8:43 a.m., someone knocked on your front door. You wiped your hands and walked to the entryway. The knock came again, firmer this time. You peeked through the side glass and froze. Two men stood on your porch, both in plain clothes, but their body language was unmistakable, calm, alert, authoritative. One of them held a badge. "Ms. Emily Jacobs?" the taller man asked when you opened the door. "Yes," you said cautiously. "I'm Special Agent Carter, and this is Special Agent Ramirez. We're with the FBI. May we come in and speak with you for a few minutes?" You felt the floor drop from beneath you. Your mind scrambled for some logical explanation. Identity theft, a misunderstanding, a mistake. But nothing came. You led them into the living room, your hands trembling slightly. You gestured for them to sit. Neither did. They remained standing, professional but not aggressive. "Ms. Jacobs," Agent Carter said gently, "we're here because your name has come up in an ongoing investigation involving international wire fraud and organized cybercrime. Specifically, funds traced through your bank accounts have been linked to several victims of what we call romance scams." You blinked. I think you're mistaken," you said quietly. "Possibly," Agent Ramirez replied, "but we need to ask you some questions. You've sent multiple wire transfers over the last several months, correct?" "I was just helping someone," you said, hearing your own voice quiver. "He's not a criminal. We're in a relationship. He's in Dubai. His name is Michael." Both agents exchanged a glance. "Do you know Michael's real name?" Carter asked. You paused. "No. I just know what he told me. He said he couldn't receive the money directly. Do you know where the money came from?" You shook your head. "No. I didn't ask." Agent Ramirez opened a file and handed you a printed email. You read it once, then again. It was a message from Michael, word for word, but addressed to another woman, sent 6 months before he contacted you. The same flattery, the same compliments, the same promises of love and trust. Even the same nickname, my angel. This was sent to a woman in Pennsylvania who lost nearly $90,000, Carter said. "We have reports from multiple victims with the same pattern. He tells them he can't access his money, asks them to send funds, often claiming it's for emergencies or business needs." You felt like you had been punched. Your mouth was dry. Your hands were cold. You wanted to protest, to defend him, to deny that you had been fooled. But the words wouldn't come. "I didn't keep any of it," you whispered. "I didn't make a dime. I just helped him." "We believe you," Ramirez said gently. "But whether you knew it or not, you've been acting as a money mule. That makes you part of an international criminal operation. Now, we're not here to arrest you today. We're here to ask for your cooperation." You stared down at the photo of Michael, or whoever he really was. Your heart was pounding in your ears. "Am I going to prison?" you asked. "That depends on a few things," Carter said. "Primarily, whether you continue wiring money, and whether you help us understand how this happened." You nodded slowly, still trying to process what was unfolding. Shame crept in like a wave, thick and suffocating. You had built your life around trust, around hope, around love. Now all of it felt hollow, scripted, used. "We'll need access to your communications with him. Emails, text messages, everything. And we'll likely need to freeze your accounts for a short time." You stood up shakily and went to get your laptop. You had given this man, this stranger, everything. Your trust, your heart, your time, and now, unknowingly, your freedom. As the agent sat down and began reviewing your messages, you stared out the window. The backyard was still, the trees unmoved by the wind. You weren't angry. Not yet. You weren't sad. Not yet. You were in freefall. But somewhere in that silence, beneath the shame, the confusion, and the devastation, a new awareness was forming. It's over. And something else. Now I begin again. Chapter 9. Stop or be prosecuted, the aftermath of truth. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. After the agents left, you stood in the kitchen, the folder from the FBI still clutched in your hand. The floor beneath your feet felt unsteady, like the ground had shifted. The walls of your home, once a refuge, now pressed in around you. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. Their parting words echoed in your head. If you continue sending or receiving money, even unknowingly, you could be prosecuted as a money mule. This ends now, Emily. If you don't walk away, we'll have no choice but to involve the U.S. attorney. You had nodded. You had said you understood. But you didn't. Not fully. Not yet. You made your way to the living room and sat down slowly, lowering yourself as if you were afraid the furniture might collapse. Your breath was shallow. Your mind swirled, trying to catch up with the facts you'd just been forced to accept. Michael, if that was ever his name, was a lie. The photos, the voice notes, the plans. All fake. You had believed him. You had defended him. You had sent money, totaling over $120,000, to help with his supposed emergencies. You had done things you never thought you'd do, all in the name of love. And now, the government considered you a suspect. The word sat heavy on your chest. Suspect. As if you were the criminal. As if you had chosen this. You pulled the FBI's folder into your lap and opened it, flipping through the materials. Support groups. Legal resources. Definitions. Money laundering, conspiracy, fraud. Your name didn't appear anywhere, but you knew you were already in the system. Agent Carter didn't say it outright, but his meaning was clear. The only reason you weren't in handcuffs was because they believed you'd been deceived. That belief was conditional. If you made another transaction, if you ignored the warning, if you reached out to Michael again, one wrong move, and you could be facing charges. The thought sent a chill down your spine. You remembered how easily you had followed his instructions, how quickly you had rationalized the requests, the payments, the secrecy. You hadn't asked enough questions. You didn't want to. You had wanted to believe in him so badly that you'd silenced your own instincts. And now you didn't know what or who to believe. The voice of Michael was still in your phone, still in your head, still in your heart. His words echoed in memory. You're my everything. I can't wait to be with you. Please, just trust me a little longer. You picked up the phone, staring at the screen. You hadn't blocked him yet. Part of you wanted to send one last message, something angry, something emotional. Another part wanted to ask if any of it had been real. But the strongest part, the one the FBI had awakened, knew that silence was the only safe answer. You powered off the phone. The silence was deafening. Cognitive dissonance settled in like fog. One half of your mind screamed that you had been played, used, exploited. The other half whispered that maybe, just maybe, it had all been a mistake. That maybe he had loved you. That maybe somehow he was also a victim. You curled into the corner of the couch, arms wrapped around your knees. Your body was still. Your mind was not. The agents had been clear. You were lucky. Lucky not to be arrested. Lucky to have been warned. But nothing about this felt like luck. It felt like betrayal. It felt like grief. And yet, beneath the pain, something else stirred. A slow, burning anger. Not just at him. Not just at yourself. But at the whole illusion. At how carefully it had been crafted. At how easily you had fallen in. You thought about the stories he told. The soft tone in his voice. The way he had made you feel seen. And now the FBI had seen you, too. But not as someone in love. As someone at risk. Your mind reeled from the contradiction. Was I a victim or an accomplice? The truth, you were starting to realize, was not either or. It was both. And that truth hurt more than anything. As the hours passed, the initial shock calcified into resolve. You would not send another dollar. You would not reply to another message. You would not let yourself be used again. But what you didn't yet know, what you were just beginning to understand, was how long it would take to untangle the emotional web. The manipulation had reached deep. The story had sunk into your identity. Letting go of him would not be as simple as deleting a contact. You would have to rebuild from the inside out. As night fell, you sat in the dark, watching the shadows stretch across the room. Your world had changed in a single day. But you were still here. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 10. The Confession. You hadn't meant to call him. The phone had been off for 2 days. 2 long, sleepless nights where your mind replayed every message, every voice note, every promise. The FBI's visit had cracked something inside you. But it hadn't shattered everything, at least not yet. This morning, before the sun had even risen, you turned the phone back on. It felt like a betrayal of everything the agents had warned you about. But the silence had grown too loud. You needed answers. Or maybe you just needed to hear his voice one last time. He answered on the second ring. "Emily," he said softly. "I thought you were gone." Your breath caught in your throat. That voice, it still sounded like comfort, like safety. But now, layered underneath it, you could hear the deception. You could hear the performance. "You lied to me," you said. Silence. A pause that stretched too long. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I did." It was like the air left the room. Your fingers trembled, and you wrapped the blanket around you tighter. Your living room, dimly lit by morning, suddenly felt too bright. You're not Michael. Not a civil engineer in Dubai. Not a widower with a daughter. You're not any of it. "No, I'm not." His honesty didn't feel like relief. It felt like ice water down your spine. You wanted to scream. To demand to know how he could do this to you. To ask why he chose you. Why he said the things he did. But your voice didn't rise. Instead, it came out small. "Then who are you?" Another pause. Then a sigh. "My name is Samuel," he said. "I live in Lagos. I'm 29. I was part of a team. It was business. At first, I didn't expect you to be real," he said. "Not like this. You were kind. You cared. You talked to me like I mattered. You closed your eyes. Your chest hurt. You scammed me. I know. You used me. You made me send money. You made me think you loved me. I didn't plan to fall for you," he said, his voice cracking. "But I did. I swear to you, Emily, somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the money." A sob rose in your throat, but you pushed it down. He sounded broken. He sounded genuine. And that was the most dangerous part, because you didn't know what was real anymore. Your thoughts blurred. How many times had he said he loved you? How many mornings had you woken up to a message, felt butterflies, felt joy? And now, you felt nothing. Or maybe you felt everything, all at once. "You told me you loved me," you whispered. "I still do." You shook your head, though he couldn't see it. "No. You love the version of me who sends you money. You love the woman you built in your head." "I know I don't deserve anything," he said. "But you weren't just another target. I need you to know that." Tears spilled down your cheeks. "Do you know what this has done to me?" you asked. "The FBI was in my house. They think I'm a criminal. I could go to prison because of you. I didn't mean for that to happen. But it did," you snapped. "You did that. You turned me into a money mule. You took my trust and twisted it into something I don't even recognize anymore. You broke me." "I'm sorry," he whispered. You hated how much you wanted him to mean it. You hated how much your heart still ached for the version of him you thought was real. The man who said he loved you. Who talked about growing old together. Who remembered your favorite songs and quoted poetry and said you were his angel. And now you were just a name in his ledger. You hung up. Your hands were shaking uncontrollably. The phone fell to the floor. Your body felt hollow. The truth was out, but nothing felt resolved. There was no closure. Just more pain. This was trauma. You could feel it settling into your bones like a sickness. Your mind couldn't make sense of it. How one person could be both a criminal and a companion, a liar and a comfort. How you could still miss him, even now. How your entire sense of reality could be rewritten in a matter of minutes. The dissonance was unbearable. You weren't just grieving a relationship. You were grieving yourself, your judgment, your innocence, your ability to trust. You no longer knew where the scam ended, and you began. That was the cruelty of it. It wasn't just a lie. It was a theft of identity, of stability, of safety. Your body folded in on itself, and you wept, not just for the man you thought you loved, but for the woman you no longer recognized in the mirror. The FBI had shown you the proof. Now Samuel had confirmed it. And yet, your heart still didn't know how to let go. Chapter 11. The Whirlwind. The silence was deafening. Emily had blocked Samuel, Michael, whatever his real name was. She deleted every message, erased every photo, removed the music playlists they'd made together. Even the little folder she kept on her desktop titled Our Future. Gone. But deleting wasn't the same as forgetting, and silence wasn't the same as peace. The first few days after she cut off all contact felt like standing in the wreckage of a house she didn't know had been on fire. Smoke was still rising, but there was nothing left to save. Only ashes. Only memory. Only pain. She stayed in bed. Her phone remained on silent. She didn't open the blinds. Meals became optional. She stared at the ceiling for hours, her mind looping in slow, suffocating spirals. Was any of it real? Did he ever mean a word of it? How did I fall for this? Tears came often and without warning. Sometimes they were soft and quiet. Other times they were violent, full-body sobs that left her gasping for air. The grief wasn't linear. It never is. 1 hour she felt rage, hot, explosive rage. She wanted to scream, to throw her phone through the window, to fly to Nigeria and confront him. She would imagine herself yelling at him, calling him a monster, exposing him to the world. The next hour, she was bargaining. Maybe he did love me. Maybe this is just how it started, but it changed. He said he loved me. What if that part was real? Then denial. She'd sit with her hands pressed to her face, whispering, "No, no, no," over and over like a mantra. Like if she said it enough times, the truth would reverse itself and become something she could live with. But the worst of it, what truly hollowed her out, was the sadness. Not ordinary sadness, but the kind that strips everything away. That numbs the body and floods the mind. That makes the smallest task, brushing her hair, answering a text, making toast, feel impossible. Time lost all meaning. Morning and night bled together. She'd wake up at 2 a.m. soaked in sweat, heart pounding, panicked that she'd dreamt the whole thing, and then realize it was worse than a dream. It was memory. It was real. The few friends she had called, texted. She didn't answer. They left voicemails. Just checking in. "We love you. No pressure. Just let us know you're okay." She couldn't find the words to respond. What would she say? I fell in love with a fake person. I became a criminal without knowing it. The FBI showed up in my living room. And I still miss him. No one would understand. Hell, she didn't understand. Some part of her was still in shock, frozen in place, watching her life collapse in slow motion. But another part kept screaming, "Move. Do something. Wake up." And yet, her limbs wouldn't cooperate. Her body didn't respond. She was mentally paralyzed, trapped in a loop of thoughts too heavy to carry and too loud to escape. Every once in a while, she would try. She'd sit on the couch, clutching a mug of tea she never drank, trying to breathe. She'd pull up an old article on trauma, reread the FBI's victim information packet, scroll through a support group page without posting. All of it felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. She was no longer the woman who laughed at silly voice notes, who stayed up late imagining a beach wedding, who whispered, "I love you too," into her phone like a teenager. That woman was gone. And what was left? A middle-aged woman with no energy, no appetite, and no clue how to put herself back together. But even in that darkness, even in the grief, the rage, the disbelief, something faint remained. Not hope. Not yet. But space. A sliver of silence between the crashing waves. A breath. A pause. And within that pause, a quiet question began to form. What now? She didn't have the answer. But maybe when the whirlwind slowed, she would. Chapter 12. The Realization. The storm didn't pass. It just changed shape. Days blurred into weeks, and as the emotional whirlwind slowly began to quiet, something heavier took its place, reality. Cold, unflinching, and utterly merciless. Emily sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened mail. Bills, loan statements, a final notice from her mortgage lender. The numbers blurred together, but one truth stood out. There was little left. She had sent so much. All of her savings. All of her retirement fund. The small emergency fund she had kept for unexpected expenses. Then she borrowed. Credit cards, cash advances, even a small loan from a colleague she had once helped during a tough time. She hadn't paid it back. She wouldn't be able to. The house was next. The home she had bought with her savings, the one with the creaky porch and the old maple tree out front, was at risk. She hadn't told anyone. Who could she tell? Who would understand that this wasn't about stupidity or greed, but a slow, calculated unraveling of her trust, her heart, her sense of self? There was no one. No close family she could turn to. Her sister lived across the country, and they rarely spoke. No close friends who hadn't quietly drifted away during the months she'd spent wrapped up in Michael. She had isolated herself, not because he told her to, but because the fantasy he offered felt better than reality. She wanted so badly to believe in it. And now that reality was all that remained, she had no one to lean on. Just the quiet. And the pain. It wasn't just emotional anymore. Her body hurt. Her back ached from tension. Her chest tightened with each breath. Her sleep came in bursts, when it came at all, and always ended in a jolt of panic. The thought that circled her mind again and again wasn't even a question anymore. It was a whisper, a sentence she couldn't unthink. I can't live like this. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. It was already stitched into the fabric of her days. The loss wasn't just financial, it was personal. She had loved someone who didn't exist, had become someone she didn't recognize. And now the future that stretched out before her felt not just empty, but hostile. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a woman. She saw a failure, a fool, a warning to others. She started to run her fingers along the edges of old memories, her mother's laugh, her father's voice, the way it felt to be a young woman with nothing to fear and everything to hope for. But even those thoughts turned to shadows. They made her ache, because they reminded her of what she'd lost. Not just money, not just trust, but her foundation. Her belief that she was safe in the world. One afternoon, she walked into the bathroom and closed the door behind her. She didn't lock it. She just sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the floor. Time passed. How much, she wasn't sure. The thought returned. I could make this stop. She imagined the world without her in it. The bills that would go unpaid. The house that would be sold. The silence that would settle. It almost felt like relief. But then out of nowhere, another thought arrived uninvited. It was a memory. A moment. Michael, no, Samuel, had once said to her, "You're the strongest woman I know." It was a lie. But something in it sparked a flicker of resistance. Am I? She asked herself. Was that ever true? She stood up slowly. Her legs were trembling. Her chest still hurt. But she turned on the sink, splashed cold water on her face, and looked at her reflection. It was puffy, red-eyed, exhausted. Still here. Still breathing. She dried her hands, walked out of the bathroom, and sat down at her desk. She pulled a yellow notepad from the drawer and uncapped a pen. At the top of the page, she wrote 2 words. Next steps. She didn't know what they were yet. But she wrote them anyway. The pain hadn't lifted. The grief hadn't faded. But she had made one decision. She wasn't going to vanish. Not like this. Not because of him. Not because of what they did to her. And not before she figured out what came next. Chapter 13. The end. The days continued, though they no longer felt like days. More like endless stretches of gray, drawn out in silence. Emily stopped checking the mail. The phone went unanswered. The blinds remained closed. Her world had collapsed inward, folding tightly around her like a box with no exit. She tried briefly to find something, some path forward. She had read a few articles online, some from support groups or nonprofit websites. The words looked promising: healing, recovery, emotional support, hope. But reading them was like looking through glass at something far away. Her mind couldn't hold the information. She would get halfway through a paragraph, then forget where she started. Her brain felt soaked in fog. Every sound startled her. Every silence dragged her further down. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Not in the mirror. Not in her memories. Not in her thoughts. The shame was relentless. It filled every corner of her. It whispered that her life had been reduced to a cautionary tale. She wasn't just a victim. She had become a burden, a failure, a fool. That voice, silent but constant, grew louder each day. Sleep was her only escape. A few hours of nothingness. A few hours where she wasn't remembering the scam, the betrayal, the look on the FBI agent's face when they told her the truth. But sleep had become harder to find. Even the sleeping pills, prescribed weeks ago in a rare moment of medical concern, had stopped working as they once did. Until one night, they offered a different kind of promise. It was a cold Thursday in June. She hadn't eaten since the day before, maybe longer. She didn't remember. The house was still, her body empty. The grief was now a physical ache, deep in her bones. Her heart felt bruised from the inside. She sat on her bed, in the clothes she had worn for days. On the nightstand sat the small white bottle. She picked it up, turned it in her hands. The label was worn, her name printed cleanly beneath the dosage instructions she had long stopped following. She didn't write a letter. She didn't plan a goodbye. Only one act, one last message, a simple text to her sister. "I'm sorry. I love you. Goodbye." She pressed send, placed the phone face down on the table, and opened the bottle. There was no hesitation. There was no rage. Just surrender. Each pill felt like letting go, of the pain, of the noise, of the questions that had no answers, of the life she could no longer live. She lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. The edges of the room began to blur, then fade. The pain, at last, began to ease. By the time her sister saw the message, it was late afternoon. She had been working, distracted by her own life, not noticing the strange quiet in their usual text exchanges. She called. No answer. She called again. Nothing. Panic didn't hit until a couple of days had passed. She called the local police, and they drove to Emily's house an hour later, using the spare key Emily had kept under a rock by the front porch. The police called her back later that day. She knew the moment she answered the phone. She knew. Her sister was gone. The air was too still. The silence too deep. The ambulance arrived too late. Emily was gone. And with her went not just a life, but a story of vulnerability, of misplaced trust, of human pain too heavy to carry alone. Her sister stood in her own home, the phone still clenched in her hand, reading the final words again and again, whispering through tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" But Emily had told no one. Like many victims of psychological scams, she carried the full weight of her shame in silence. Her isolation wasn't just emotional. It was the natural consequence of a world that doesn't yet understand what these crimes truly take from their victims. Not just money, but identity, trust, hope, and sometimes everything. Chapter 14. Epilogue. In the months following Emily's death, her sister Laura struggled to understand how the vibrant, thoughtful woman she had known could vanish into such quiet devastation. The shock gave way to questions, the questions to anger, and eventually to sorrow that lived just beneath the surface of every breath. She searched for answers in the digital remains of her sister's life. Text messages, emails, old browser tabs still open on the laptop. Slowly, the truth began to form. The man named Michael. The promises. The transfers. The story so carefully built, and so completely false. Her sister had been scammed, drawn into a web of lies that left her emotionally and financially broken. Laura discovered that Emily had never fully ended the relationship, clinging to the hope that some part of Michael's love was real, even after the FBI's visit exposed the truth. The betrayal was incomprehensible. But what struck Laura more than anything was how invisible it all had been. There had been no warning signs she could see at the time, no clear cries for help. Only now, in hindsight, did the gaps and silences reveal themselves. The way Emily had withdrawn, the excuses she made for her dwindling savings, the haunted look in her eyes that Laura had mistaken for fatigue. Laura contacted the FBI agent who had visited Emily months earlier. He was somber but compassionate. "She's not the first," he said gently. "And sadly, she won't be the last." He gave her links to websites and information about scam victim psychology, trauma recovery, and an organization called the Scars Institute. He urged Laura to read it, not just to understand what happened, but to help others in her sister's place. Laura read it all. Then she began to write. Not fiction, not poetry, just truth, raw and unfiltered. She submitted her sister's story anonymously to a victims' advocacy group. She started participating in awareness webinars. She joined forums and left comments for others who were still caught in the fog of manipulation and grief. Sometimes she stayed up late replying to people she would never meet just to say, "You're not alone. My sister went through this too." Over time, the pain didn't disappear, but it started to take shape. It became something she could carry instead of something that crushed her. That was when she understood what her sister had never had: community, connection, and validation. The kind of support that reminds you your pain is real, but survivable. That no matter how convincing the scam, it is not a reflection of your worth. Emily's story is no longer just a tragedy. It has become a warning, a testimony, and, perhaps most importantly, a call for compassion. For every Emily, there are thousands more. Men and women, young and old, smart and kind and capable, who believe in something beautiful, and are devastated by something cruel. Laura still misses her sister every day. Now, she speaks her name not just in mourning, but in purpose. To protect others, to break the silence, to honor the woman who once believed in love, and deserved far more than what the world gave her. If this story resonates with you or someone you love, seek support. Healing begins with understanding, and no one should have to navigate the aftermath of betrayal alone. Written by Tim McGuinness, Ph.D., based on a true story. With aid and assistance by Vianney Gonzalez, Debbie Montgomery Johnson, and Janina Morsinek. Copyright 2025 Scars Institute, Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams Incorporated, a Florida, USA-based nonprofit crime victims advocacy and services provider.
Part 2. Analysis of Emily's story. The breaking point. How extreme stress and psychological trauma lead scam victims to lie or commit suicide. By Tim McGuinness, Ph.D. Section 1. Discovering the deception. When a scam victim uncovers the deception that has upended their life, the emotional and psychological toll can be catastrophic. The betrayal, financial loss, and shattered trust often plunge them into a state of extreme stress and trauma, pushing them toward a harrowing decision: to lie and hide their pain, or, in the most tragic cases, to end their life. This analysis explores the mental situation, cognitive dissonance, and ongoing trauma that drives scam victims to this breaking point, using the fictionalized character Emily Jacobs. In the story, When Emily Fell, we will use as a lens to illustrate the horror in a person's mind as they arrive at this devastating crossroads. Through research and psychological insights, we'll delve into the factors that lead to such a decision, painting a vivid picture of the internal torment that defines this dark journey. Section 2. The Initial Shock. A Shattered Reality. Emily Jacobs, a 53-year-old English professor from Madison, Wisconsin, thought she had found love with Michael, a civil engineer she met through a crossword app. 4 months, their relationship blossomed through messages, poems, and promises of a future together. She sent him money, $120,000 in total, to help with supposed emergencies, believing in his love and his assurances of repayment. This moment of discovery is a seismic event for scam victims, marking the onset of extreme stress and psychological trauma. According to a 2021 study in the Journal of Traumatic Stress, 40% of scam victims report symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, including intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, and emotional numbness. For Emily, the revelation by the FBI agents triggered a cascade of emotions: shock, disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal. Her mind reeled as it tried to reconcile the loving Michael she knew with the reality of a faceless scammer in Lagos. This cognitive dissonance, the mental conflict between her belief in Michael's love and the evidence of his deception, became the foundation of her trauma. Cognitive dissonance creates a state of psychological discomfort that the mind desperately seeks to resolve. Emily's initial response was denial, a common defense mechanism. She reread Michael's messages, searching for signs of genuine affection, hoping there was some mistake. But the evidence was undeniable, and denial gave way to a flood of grief. She mourned the loss of the relationship, the future she had envisioned, and the trust she had placed in him. This grief was compounded by financial stress. $120,000 was a significant loss for a professor on a modest salary, money she couldn't easily replace. Section 3. The Descent. Ongoing trauma and emotional turmoil. As the initial shock subsided, Emily entered a phase of ongoing trauma, a relentless cycle of emotional and psychological distress that eroded her sense of self. Research from the American Psychological Association, 2022, highlights that scam victims often experience a range of trauma symptoms, including anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of shame. For Emily, these symptoms manifested as a constant replay of the scam in her mind. Every message, every promise, every moment of vulnerability she shared with Michael. These intrusive thoughts were like a haunting echo, reminding her of her perceived failure to see the truth. The horror in Emily's mind was a tangled web of emotions, each one feeding into the next. Sadness dominated her days, a heavy weight that made it hard to get out of bed. She cried for hours, mourning not just the loss of Michael but the loss of her own innocence. This sadness was laced with shame, a toxic emotion that whispered she was foolish, gullible, unworthy of love. As an educated woman, a professor who prided herself on her intelligence, she couldn't understand how she had been so easily deceived. This shame isolated her, making her withdraw from friends and family, unable to face their potential judgment. But sadness and shame weren't the only emotions in play. Anger surged in waves, a fiery counterpoint to her grief. She felt rage toward Michael. How could he exploit her like this? And toward herself for not seeing the signs sooner. She imagined confronting him, screaming at him, demanding her money back, but the futility of that fantasy only deepened her despair. This anger oscillated with her sadness, creating a cycle of emotional extremes that left her exhausted, her mind a battleground of conflicting feelings. Section 4. Cognitive dissonance intensified this turmoil. Emily's mind couldn't reconcile the loving Michael she had known with the scammer who had betrayed her. She clung to the hope that some part of his affection was real, even as evidence proved otherwise. This dissonance created a mental horror, a constant tension between what she wanted to believe and what she knew to be true. She felt trapped in a nightmare where her own emotions were the enemy, pulling her in opposite directions with no escape. Section 5. The Weight of Isolation. A Mind in Crisis. Isolation became a defining feature of Emily's trauma, amplifying the horror in her mind. Research from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, 2020, indicates that scam victims often experience social withdrawal due to shame and fear of judgment, which exacerbates their psychological distress. Emily couldn't bring herself to tell anyone about the scam, not her sister, not her friends, not even a therapist. The thought of admitting her vulnerability was unbearable. What would they think of her? How could she explain that she had fallen for a man who didn't exist, that she had sent him money she couldn't afford to lose? This isolation turned her mind into a prison, a place where her thoughts echoed endlessly with no outlet. She felt like a failure, a fool, a cautionary tale. The shame was suffocating, a constant whisper that she was unworthy of love, unworthy of respect. She replayed every moment of the scam, searching for the signs she missed, berating herself for her naivety. This self-blame was a form of psychological torture, a relentless assault on her sense of self that left her feeling hollow, broken, and alone. Section 6. The ongoing trauma also manifested physically. Emily couldn't sleep, her nights filled with nightmares of Michael's voice, his promises, his lies. Her appetite vanished, and her body ached from the tension she carried in her shoulders, her chest, her jaw. She felt like a shadow of herself, a ghost haunting her own life, unable to escape the horror of her thoughts. The world outside her home became a terrifying place, filled with potential judgment and pity, so she stayed inside, the walls of her once comforting home now a cage that trapped her in her misery. Section 7. The breaking point. Cognitive dissonance and the decision. As the trauma continued unabated, Emily reached a breaking point, a line where she faced a harrowing decision: to lie and hide her pain, or to end her life. This decision was the culmination of the cognitive dissonance, shame, and isolation that had consumed her since the scam's discovery. According to a 2019 study in psychological trauma, theory, research, practice, and policy, scam victims under extreme stress often experience a phenomenon known as trauma-induced decision-making, where the overwhelming emotional pain distorts their ability to make rational choices, leading to extreme behaviors like deception or self-harm. For Emily, the cognitive dissonance was unbearable. She couldn't reconcile the love she had felt for Michael with the reality of his betrayal. Part of her still wanted to believe in him, to hold on to the dream of their future together, even as she knew it was a lie. This internal conflict created a mental horror, a constant battle between hope and despair, love and betrayal, self-worth and shame. She felt like she was losing her mind, torn apart by emotions she couldn't control, trapped in a cycle of pain with no way out. The shame and isolation pushed her further toward the breaking point. She couldn't face the idea of telling anyone the truth. Not her sister, not her friends, not even a stranger. The thought of their pity, their judgment, was too much to bear. So she lied. She told her sister she was fine, that her finances were under control, even as her savings dwindled and her credit card debt grew. She smiled at colleagues, pretending nothing was wrong, while inside, her mind was a storm of anguish. These lies were a desperate attempt to preserve her dignity, to hide the horror of her reality, but they only deepened her isolation, making her feel more alone than ever. But lying couldn't erase the pain, and the horror in Emily's mind grew darker. She felt like a failure, a fool, a burden. The intrusive thoughts became relentless. I can't live like this. I don't deserve to live like this. She imagined the world without her in it, the bills that would go unpaid, the house that would be sold, the silence that would settle. It felt like relief, a way to escape the torment that had become her daily existence. This was the line, the breaking point where the decision to commit suicide became a real possibility. The horror in Emily's mind at this moment was a maelstrom of despair, shame, and self-loathing. She felt like she was drowning in her own thoughts, each one a wave that pulled her deeper into the abyss. She saw no way out, no light at the end of the tunnel. The love she had felt for Michael, once a source of joy, had become a weapon turned against her, a reminder of her vulnerability, her failure, her worthlessness. She couldn't imagine a future where she could trust again, love again, live again. The pain was too much, the shame too heavy, the isolation too complete. Section 8. The Decision. A Tragic End. On a cold Thursday night in June, Emily sat on her bed, the small white bottle of sleeping pills on her nightstand. She hadn't eaten in days, her body as empty as her heart. The grief was a physical ache, deep in her bones, her heart bruised from the inside. She picked up the bottle, turned it in her hands, the label worn but her name still visible beneath the dosage instructions she had long stopped following. She didn't write a letter. She didn't plan a goodbye. Only one act, one last message. A simple text to her sister. I'm sorry. I love you. Goodbye. She pressed send, placed the phone face down on the table, and opened the bottle. There was no hesitation, no rage, just surrender. Each pill felt like letting go, of the pain, of the noise, of the questions that had no answers, of the life she could no longer live. She lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. The edges of the room began to blur, then fade. The pain, at last, began to ease. Emily's decision to commit suicide was the tragic culmination of the extreme stress and psychological trauma she endured as a scam victim. The cognitive dissonance, the shame, the isolation, and the relentless horror in her mind had pushed her to a breaking point where she saw no other way out. Her story is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of scams, not just on finances, but on the human psyche. Section 9. Conclusion. a call for awareness and support. Emily's journey to the breaking point underscores the urgent need for awareness and support for scam victims. The extreme stress and psychological trauma they endure can lead to devastating decisions, lying to hide their pain, or, in the most tragic cases, ending their lives. Organizations like the Scars Institute offer critical resources, including support groups, counseling, and education, to help victims navigate the aftermath of a scam. If you or someone you know has been affected, seek help. The horror in a scam victim's mind is real, but with support, understanding, and compassion, it doesn't have to be the end of their story.
Thank you for listening to our Scars Institute free audiobook, Emily's Story. What did you think of our story? What did you think of our analysis? Please share your thought in the comments. If you are a scam victim, please get the help you need. Scams, fraud, and cybercrime take lives every day. The life you save could be your own. The Scars Institute is here to help. If you are a recent scam victim, please learn what you need to know now to survive this by visiting our website, scamvictimsupport.org. You can also sign up for our free support and recovery program by visiting our website, support.againstscams.org. The Scars Institute also offers free courses for scam victim survivors and their family by visiting our website, scarseducation.org. Please stay safe. The world is a better place with you in it. To learn more, visit all of the Scars Institute websites. We are the global experts in scam victimology, support, and recovery from the trauma of scams. The Scars Institute can help you, but you have to make the effort. As hard as it is, you are fighting for your life. Remember, this was not your fault. You are a survivor. You are stronger than you know. You are not alone. Axios, you are worthy. From all of us at the Scars Institute, we wish you the very best.